Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 78, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I think my voice is back to normal mostly. I am sorry to have inflicted it upon you for the past couple of episodes. Whatever virus I had settled in my throat for a couple of days and made me sound like I was singing bass in the choir. We've had a busy couple of weeks. We got piglets 2 weeks ago. My husband and I always raise some pigs over the summer, and we sell the pork at the end of the season. We've also got chicks. That has been a sad story of woe this year. I usually get chicks from the farm store, and the farm store had such trouble getting chicks from the hatchery because the U.S. Postal Service is a hot mess, and chicks were arriving dead. They usually ship them within 24 hours after they hatch, but shipments were being delayed or misdirected. Things that were supposed to end up here ended up in other parts of the country, and so getting chicks this year was quite an ordeal. I originally got 12 chicks, and the first 2 days that we had them, 6 of them died. We've been raising livestock here for more than 15 years, and this wasn't our first rodeo. We know how to keep chicks alive, but they were just so stressed. So we kept those 6 chicks that survived, and I ended up buying a couple. I bought 4 more from the neighbor boy who had incubated some. I could incubate some, but then we end up with a ton of roosters, and that's not good either. So right now I think I have 9 females and 1 little baby rooster that I'm hoping I can find a home for when he gets a little bigger. And things have settled down a little bit, but it was quite a roller coaster there on the homestead for a couple of days. I've got a greenhouse full of plants because I am the chairman of a fundraising plant sale at the end of May, and we grow about half the inventory in my greenhouse. It is still too early here to put things in the ground. The old timers will tell you that you don't plant until there's no more snow on the mountains, and we still have snow on the mountains. So we usually don't plant until Memorial Day weekend or the last weekend in May. And even then, we've had snow in June, so it's no guarantee. I have managed to get a little bit of sewing done. I have all the stars made for my Bernina University quilted jacket. I think there are 7 of us going to Bernina University in Salt Lake City at the end of June, and we're all making quilted jackets. And most of us have our stars done, but we haven't started quilting the pieces or putting the jackets together yet. When I stop in at the quilt store, we all like to compare notes about where we are in the process. I am teaching the free-range slacks pattern from Sew House 7 at our local quilt store in June, and I had made up a sample pair to have on display at the store, and then I decided to lengthen them into full-length pants, and I made a pair for myself, the full-length ones, and I used Essex linen. I actually bought a wide back at the quilt store. You'll hear about another wide back in a couple of minutes because I tend to do that. I bought a wide back and I used that for the pants. It worked out really well. The Essex linen is a 45% linen, 55% cotton blend, and it made a beautiful pair of pants that I'm sure I will get a lot of wear out of this summer. And I've got a few more fabrics stacked up to make a couple more pairs. I taught a class on the Scout tee last week at our quilt store, and I have kind of a mashup pattern for a woven tee that I've customized to myself, and it's part Scout tee, it's part Cadence top from Love Notions, and it's part a new look pattern, and the number escapes me at the moment. But that Franken pattern is what I use to make myself woven t-shirts for the summer. So I knocked out another one of those using a 50-50 modal cotton blend from Cloud9 Fabrics. It's the Pip and Low Nightfall line, and I had purchased that fabric at Pacific Fabrics on one of my trips to Seattle, and the top turned out really well. I'm very pleased with it. I also occasionally will flip through my collection of patterns just to see if there's something that I could whip up fairly quickly, and a Berta pattern floated to the top of the pile. It's Berta 6146, and I originally bought this pattern because View A is a blouse with a frilly neck collar, and it looked very similar to a top that I had tried on at Kohl's, which was adorable and fit me really well, except that it was too short. The oft-heard refrain. And it's why I now sew most of my clothes, because everything in the stores is too short. And I haven't made View A of the Berta 6146 pattern, but I looked at it and I thought I could knock out View B without too much difficulty. And View B is the same bodice, but it's got a different sleeve treatment. It has 3/4 sleeves with a wide elastic cuff, and it has a V-neck. So I went to my stack of stash fabrics and looked through them, and I pulled out another wide back. So our quilt store carries the K-Facet wide backs, which are a cotton sateen fabric. And it's a different base cloth than the cotton that is used for the 44-inch wide bolts. This cotton sateen has an amazing hand to it. It just feels wonderful, and it drapes beautifully. I look at it sometimes and I think that would make a very beautiful backing for a quilt, but it would almost be a waste of gorgeous fabric. And of course, I love the prints because they're bright, screaming colors, and I like to dress like a parrot. So anything with bright colors in it is just right up my alley. I am not a muddy earth tones person. I have winter coloring, and I look good in bright, saturated colors. So I had a yard of this 108 fabric, and I cut out Berta 6146 with some modifications. So what I did was I took what I call my perfect woven tee pattern, and I took the bodice pieces from that and I compared them to the Berta bodice pieces. That saves me a lot of time and energy. I can see right away whether the bust dart needs to be lowered or I have to widen anything. I've got high hip curves, so most of my tops, the ones that I find the most flattering, either widen out from the armpits or they widen out not too long after the waist, because if I don't do that, the fabric hangs up on my hip bones. That's kind of hard to describe without drawing you a picture, but hopefully you get the idea. So I compared my woven t-shirt pattern to the Berta 6146 pattern, and I had to make a few minor modifications. But then I went ahead and put the pattern together using the K-Facet wide back. And oh my goodness, it is such a pretty top. One of the issues that I have with V-necks is that I'm fairly busty. And so I've got, not to put too fine a point on it, I've got structural bras. And they are not plunge bras. They are not delicate little wisps of lace. And most V-necks are too low, and my bra ends up showing. This V-neck is perfect. It's low enough to be a V-neck, but it's not so low that I have to worry about my bra peeking out. I love the 3/4 length sleeves with the elastic cuffs. There is a lot to like about this pattern, and I have a couple more pieces of K-Facet wide backs in my stash that will probably end up being additional tops. The other thing that I really loved about this pattern, and I may have mentioned this before, when I was designing knitting patterns and designing sweaters, we had to, if we were designing a sweater with set-in sleeves, we had to calculate our own sleeve caps and figure out the shaping. And there were various formulas for doing that. And obviously, woven fabric differs in its behavior from knitted fabrics, but one of the things that has always irritated me about commercial patterns is that I think the sleeve caps are too high. They're too tall. And the length of the sleeve cap is too long for the length of the armscye. I know all of the tricks and tips for setting in sleeves in woven garments, and I still fight with set-in sleeves. I almost always end up shaving a little bit off the top of the sleeve cap to get it to fit properly. I've run across a couple of patterns where there is no ease in the sleeve cap. The Love Notions Cadence top is one. That pattern, in fact, instructs you to set the sleeves in flat, much as you would do with a knit garment. This Berta pattern is the second one that I've run into where there is no ease stitching in the sleeve cap, and you just pin the sleeve cap into the armhole opening and it went in as slick as butter. I was very pleased with the way the sleeves fit when I was finished with this top. I have broad shoulders, and that tends to be an area where I have problems, but this top fits beautifully. It's always a happy day when I come up with a pattern that fits me well, that I can use over and over again. I can modify the neckline on this one. I can modify the sleeves. It's going to be a great pattern going forward, and I'm really happy to have a V-neck that isn't so plunging. So that's what I have been sewing. And I should note that today's episode is going to be a rather chatty one. I don't have anything for you in terms of a formal topic. As I said, it was a busy couple of weeks for me, and I just didn't have the time to do any research. I have received some really great suggestions for show topics and for guests to interview, so I am trying to get those onto the schedule. I can't always get a guest that someone suggests because some people either don't have time in their schedule for an interview or don't want to do an interview, but I do try to make an effort with all the suggestions that I get to at least contact the person and ask them if they would be interested in doing an interview. And of course, I should probably talk about the elephant in the room, which is the closing of Joann Fabrics. First of all, let me say that this is a nuanced topic. This is not black and white. I run into people occasionally who say they never shop at Joann Fabrics because it's a cut rate store or whatever. They only support independent fabric stores. That's wonderful. I ran into the same kind of attitude about fibers when I was a knitting designer, and people would tell me that they only ever knit with natural fibers and acrylic would never go through their hands, which is fine. Again, if that's the decision that you've made, that's great, but not everyone has the luxury of using the most expensive materials. Not everyone has access to those materials. I can tell you that living in a rural area, as I do, even when I was a knitting designer, it was very difficult for me to put my hands on new releases in the yarn world. Sometimes I would get sent samples by the yarn companies, but a lot of times I had to sleuth those things out for myself. We had a yarn store here in town, but I didn't always have access to the same selection that people in urban areas or people on the east or west coasts had. So for some people, Joann Fabrics may be the only place to get craft supplies, sewing supplies, fabric, whatever. I'm not going to judge. I shop wherever I can find what I need. That might be the local quilt store, that might be Hobby Lobby, that might be Joann Fabrics. Each of us makes those kinds of shopping decisions for himself or herself, and it's not for the rest of us to judge. I have spent a fair bit of money at Joann Fabrics over the years. I know exactly how much money because I do our taxes and it's a line item in our budget. I'm still waking up on some days and realizing that Joann Fabrics isn't going to be there after another couple weeks, and that kind of makes my gut clench a little bit. I've likened it to having a friend in hospice, which may be a strange analogy, but I think that there is a certain amount of grief that we're all going through with the closure of Joann's, and yeah. So our store here in Kalispell is still open, and that is as of the first Monday in May. About half the store is cordoned off, and the merchandise has been moved to the other half of the store. There's very little there that I want to buy. I stop in every couple of days just to kind of riffle through the patterns, but we never had a big pattern selection to begin with. We didn't have a lot of apparel fabrics, so in terms of that selection, it's pretty limited. I'm going to be traveling to Seattle soon to visit my kids, and the Joann's closure kind of ties in with another couple of closures. I will try to explain this in a way that makes sense to those of you who may never have been to the Pacific Northwest portion of the United States. I live in Kalispell, Montana, which is up in the northwest corner of the state of Montana. And when I travel to Seattle, I drive south or southwest a ways to get to I-90, which is the major interstate that goes across the United States, all the way from Seattle to Boston. I pick up I-90 and I head across the panhandle of Idaho and then into eastern Washington. And I continue on I-90 until I get to Seattle. And my trips over to Seattle always involve stopping at a number of fabric stores. My husband calls it checking the trap lines. So my first stop is usually at the Joann Fabrics in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And not too far from there is Becky's Sewing Center. So I'll pop into Becky's. Then I continue over into the state of Washington and to the city of Spokane. And Spokane has, at the moment, 3 Joann Fabric stores. And as far as I know, they are still open. I'm going to see when I drive over to Seattle in a couple of days whether or not they've closed. I usually stop at each Joann Fabric store. I also stop at a big quilt store called the Quilting Bee. And I'm pretty sure I've talked about the Quilting Bee in the past. This is one of those destination quilt stores. It's been in Spokane for, a while, at least 10 years, because I remember going there in 2015 when it was in a little strip mall and it had clearly outgrown its space there already. But the owners had purchased some land about a mile away, and they were making plans to build a great big store and building. And then COVID hit. But they went ahead with it. It was kind of a leap of faith for them, I think. But the store is beautiful. It's always busy when I'm in there. They've got a ton of classes. They sell machines. They service machines. The couple who owned the Quilting Bee when I started shopping there just sold it, I think within the last 6 months, to another young couple. And hopefully the Quilting Bee will be in Spokane for years to come. There is another smaller quilt store that is up on South Hill. It's called the Stitchery on Regal. It used to be Regal Fabric and Gifts, and it was about twice the size that it is now. It's also in a little strip mall. I've taught at that store a couple of times. The owner felt that it was time for her to downsize, so she gave up half of her space and she concentrates now on embroidery and English paper piecing and things like that, as well as long arm quilting. She's still a Juki dealer, and I know she would love to have me come over and teach, but it just hasn't worked out. It's not as easy to teach in Spokane as it was when my daughter was at Gonzaga, but I do try to pop in there every now and then. So after I leave Spokane and I'm still heading west on I-90, I would come to a town called Moses Lake, which was out in the middle of nowhere between Spokane and Seattle. That's a big farming area in Washington state. Moses Lake had a Joann Fabrics, and I know for sure that that one's closed because I saw that they closed on April 28th. So I would stop there. I figured out what each Joann Fabrics store had, kind of was their signature thing. And the Joann Fabrics store in Moses Lake always had a phenomenal remnant rack. I don't know why people there didn't buy remnants, but I would go in there and come out with bags full of remnants. After Moses Lake, I would continue west. And now you're going to get a little bit of a geography/topography lesson. So Seattle is in an interesting place. If you think about a city like Indianapolis, Indiana, which is in the middle of cornfields, in the middle of a very flat area, there are many, many ways to get into a city like that. You can approach it from all directions. Seattle is literally built on a rock outcropping. That area was carved out by glaciers, and I laugh because I think of all of the places to build a city, why would you choose a rock outcropping? But whatever, it's a city. The unfortunate thing is that there are only about 4 ways to get in and out of Seattle. You can approach it from the east on I-90 or on Highway 2. You can approach it from the north, coming down out of Canada. You can, sort of, depending on weather and various other factors, if the ferry system is running, you can take a ferry across Puget Sound to get to the Olympic Peninsula, or you can drive south down toward Portland, and when you get to Tacoma, you loop back up and go to the Olympic Peninsula that way if the ferries aren't running for some reason. And those literally are the only ways to get in and out of Seattle. It makes me a bit nuts having a child living there because if there's ever the big one, the earthquake that they think is going to happen at some point, Seattle will literally be cut off. That's just a fact. Nobody will be driving in and out of that city. And in order to get into Seattle from the east, you have to go over Snoqualmie Pass. So that's a pass through the mountains. I actually drive over 3 separate mountain passes when I drive from Kalispell to Seattle. There are 2 in Idaho and there's 1 in Washington State. So when I get to the Cascade Mountain Range, I have to go over Snoqualmie Pass. In terms of elevation, it's actually about the same elevation as my house in Montana. We're at 3,250 feet, and I think Snoqualmie Pass is at 3,000 something. So it's not like I'm going over Pikes Peak or something, but it's still a mountain pass. And the approach from the east side is a little bit more gentle and gradual. When you get over the summit and you're driving down the west side, I liken it to a toboggan run, because it's almost straight down. You're going from 3,000 feet elevation to sea level over the space of about 40 miles, which doesn't sound like it should be that steep, but it really is. So just after I get over Snoqualmie Pass and I'm heading down the west side, there is a point to this story. I'm getting to it. Just as I come over the pass and I'm heading down the west side, the first kind of suburb of Seattle that I come to is called Issaquah. And I get off at the Issaquah exit because there is a road there with some shopping centers and some gas stations, a post office, things like that. And there used to be a quilt store there called the Gossypium Quilt Store, or Gossypium Quilts. And Gossypium is the Latin name for cotton. And about 6 months ago or so, maybe 8 months ago, Gossypium Quilts closed. They closed their brick and mortar store, which was darling. It was in a cute little shopping area in a lovely little store, and they had a great selection of fabrics. But they closed. They still have an online store, and you can still order from them. About a mile west of them is a store called Issaquah Sewing and Vacuum. And Issaquah Sewing and Vacuum is one of those kind of combination stores that you find here and there, where they sell vacuum cleaners, they sell sewing machines. Issaquah Sew and Vac also has a lot of pre-cuts, and they were a Wonderfill dealer. So they had a lot of Wonderfill thread. If I needed just one spool of something and I didn't want to order from Wonderfill, I could usually pick it up at their store. But about a week ago, I got an email that their owner wants to retire. They looked for 2 years to find a buyer for the business and were not successful, so they are closing their store as well. And their closing sale, I believe, starts today. So I'm definitely going to stop in there on my way to Seattle. I could get into some political stuff here, but I'm not going to, other than to say that the state of Washington has said to the state of California, hold my beer when it comes to taxing businesses to the breaking point. And I think that it's already been happening. Washington state is a very hostile business environment, and they're making it difficult for businesses to stay there and serve their customers. So that is all I'm going to say about that. So after I leave Issaquah and I head into Seattle proper, my daughter lives not too far from downtown because she's a buyer at Nordstrom. So I usually stay, about a mile north of her. So I'm fairly close to downtown, but not in downtown. There are 3 Joann Fabrics stores that I like to visit in that area. One is up in Linwood, which is north of Seattle by about, it takes a good hour to get up there sometimes. And Alderwood Mall is where my daughter, who works at Nordstrom, started out. Nordstrom doesn't promote you to corporate positions until you've actually worked on the sales floor. So she was an assistant manager at the Alderwood store for a couple of years. There is a Hobby Lobby up there. There's a Joann Fabrics up there. And that Joann Fabrics always had a ton of apparel fabrics. I also like to visit the Joann Fabrics that was down in Tukwila at South Center Mall down by the airport. And then the Joann Fabrics down at Tacoma Mall if I happen to be down in Tacoma or Puyallup when I teach at Sew Expo. There's also a Joann Fabrics in Puyallup that I would pop into every so often. And on those rare occasions when I would go over to the peninsula, to the Olympic Peninsula, sometimes I would pop into the Joann Fabrics in Silverdale. And that was another store that had a lot of great apparel fabrics. So obviously I'm not going to be able to shop at Joann Fabrics for much longer. Fortunately, Seattle also has Pacific Fabrics, which is a phenomenal store. And over on the peninsula in Port Townsend is a little store called District Fabric, and they also have a wonderful selection of apparel fabric. So we could talk for a little bit about buying online. I know it's not ideal because we all like to be able to touch and feel fabric and look at colors, but I have had some decent success ordering online. So I'll give you my favorite places to order fabric online. I mourn the demise of fabric.com. That actually was one place that I did do a lot of online fabric shopping, and I'm convinced that the reason it was easy to shop there was because of their search engine. To this day, I still have not found a search engine that was as comprehensive as the one that fabric.com used. You could search by brand name or by type of fabric, fabric content, weight, designer, color, all of the above. And it made it really easy to find a specific fabric or a specific type of fabric. And I think that if a store wants to sell fabric online, they need to invest the money in an excellent search engine. Otherwise, it is just too frustrating to try to find the kind of fabric that you need. So the places that I've had fairly good luck buying fabric online are knitfabric.com. That's the place I go for French terry, cotton lycra. I've been very pleased with the quality of the fabric that I've gotten, and their service is excellent. They put out an email blast on Tuesdays, and That's one of the first things I look at on Tuesday morning is what is for sale at knitfabric.com and what has come in that's new. Cali Fabrics is another one of my favorites. They also put out periodic email blasts, so it's worth getting on their list. I just put an order in with them about a week and a half ago. I got some Robert Kaufman Ponte de Roma to make some pants. They also were highlighting a new nylon viscose stretch twill that they were carrying, so I ordered some of that for a pair of pants, and it's wonderful. The fabric came the other day, and the hand of the viscose twill is just wonderful. I have ordered from Mood Fabrics in the past and gotten excellent service from them as well. I ordered some coating fabric from them that is destined for a winter coat for me. Mood will also send you swatches, which is a good way to see if that's a fabric that you want to order. The problem with ordering swatches is that by the time you make a decision, that fabric might be sold out, especially if it's dead stock. If you're overseas, it's probably a good thing that I don't live in the UK because I would probably spend all of my money at Minerva. I have ordered lots of fabric from Minerva. Even with shipping to the United States, it doesn't take as long as you would think. They have a craft club where you can get discounts. Minerva is a wonderful, wonderful resource for those of you who are in places other than the United States. Back here, I also love Amanda's Bundles. I've talked about them before. They come to Sew Expo, and I always buy a lot of fabric from them at Sew Expo, but they do have a website, and they specialize in athletic type fabrics, so things for athleisure wear. Another source is Discovery Fabrics. If you need performance type fabrics, I haven't ordered from them specifically, but I do have a good friend who sews, and she orders from them all the time. She's been very happy with their selection and with their service. If you have a favorite online supplier, email me and let me know. If I get enough, I'll keep a list and I'll read that list out on a future episode so that others can order from some of those same places. And I also want to encourage you to talk to the owner of your local quilt store if you have one. Our quilt store has been absolutely wonderful about ordering garment fabrics. Not all quilt stores will do this because it's a risk for them to tie up their cash flow in inventory that might not sell, but if you're interested in your quilt store carrying some garment fabrics, maybe you could offer to make some sample garments for them out of one or two of the fabrics that they bring in. Having a display sample a lot of times will help move the fabric, and if they see that they have somebody who's willing to help them with their marketing efforts, they'll be more willing to bring in those kinds of fabrics. So you might ask them, will you give me a 20% discount on this fabric if I buy it and make a store sample for you that you get to keep for a couple of months and then return to me? Or offer to teach some garment classes. I think we were all pleasantly surprised to find out how many garment sewists there were among the quilters in our community. And our quilt store carries all sorts of garment fabric, everything from rayon batiks to Ponte de Roma to linens and cottons. And as I said at the beginning of the podcast, I use K-facet wide backs to make clothes. So there's a lot of opportunity for garment sewists to start patronizing quilt stores. Okay, I think this has probably gotten long enough. I just want to close by saying thank you again for those of you who are leaving ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts. I really appreciate it. You can give feedback that way. You can also email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can use the fan mail feature. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. Lots of ways to give me feedback. I do try to respond to all the emails. I appreciate the suggestions for podcast guests and for episode topics, and I'm trying to get to all of those as I can. So keep them coming because I want to talk about the things that interest all of you. If you want to see photos of what I've been working on, the best place to do that is at my blog, and you can get there by going to my website, which is www.janetzabo.com. There is a link to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website where I sell my patterns and books. There's a link to my blog. The podcast website is at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. That will have the show notes page where you can find links to what I've been talking about on this episode. I will put links to all of the online stores where I typically shop for fabric. Just as a quick reminder, I probably won't have a show next week because I'm going to be traveling, but I will get back on schedule the week after that. So until then, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.